Good afternoon. My name is Yori Chang, and I'm the project manager of CLJE Lab, the Policy and Legal Innovation Lab here at the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard Law School. On behalf of my colleagues at CLJE, it's my pleasure to be hosting this conversation on lessons and reflections from the Harris County Essential Workers Board. Before we dive into the conversation, I'll just share a couple of logistics. So today's discussion will be recorded, the link to which you'll be able to find on the CLJE YouTube channel and on our website in the next couple of days. We'll reserve some time at the end of the hour to respond to your questions for our panelists, and you are welcome to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time. So at CLJE, we've long had an interest in exploring and highlighting innovative policies at the state and local level that build worker power. One such policy model that we've been really interested in is in worker boards or workforce standards boards, which are government entities typically comprised of representatives of workers, employers, and the public. What's really compelling to us about this model is its capacity to give workers a say in the process of setting and enforcing labor standards and ensuring that policymaking is shaped by workers' ideas, feedback, and lived experience with the issues at hand. We've seen these kinds of boards being created in a number of different states, notable examples of which include the Fast Food Council in California and the Nursing Home Workforce Standards Board in Minnesota. But what makes the Harris County Essential Workers Board stand out is the fact that this board is composed entirely of worker representatives and spans 9 different industries, including airport and transportation, construction, domestic work, education, healthcare, janitorial services, and food services, as well as retail. And earlier this month, we released a report on that evaluates the impact of the Essential Workers Board in its early years, which we'll drop a link to in the chat. The report was informed by the perspectives of members of the board, the county government, and advocates who were engaged in the process of setting up the board. And we're really excited to give you a chance to hear directly from some of the folks who have been involved in the board today. So without further ado, I'll briefly introduce our panelists, and you can find their full bios and read more about their amazing backgrounds on our event webpage. Danielle Igmati is a program manager at Harris County's Department of Economic Equity and Opportunity and primarily focuses on supporting the Harris County Essential Workers Board. Nafisa Ullah serves as the organizing director for the National Office of Jobs with Justice, and Kara Levi organizes educators for a national union and chairs the Harris County Essential Workers Board, where she helps push for policies that makes life better for working families in Harris County. Welcome and thank you all for joining us. And so just to start, I think I'd love to ask each of the panelists to briefly paint a picture of what was going on in Harris County and around the country when this policy came about. So maybe we'll start with you, Danielle. What was it like in Harris County at the time?
At the time that the board was conceived, we were in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there had been talk of essential jobs and essential workers. And those were people and industries that were not able to shut down due to the nature of the work. Those industries had to continue to run. So workers were going out into uncertain situations. There was still so much that we didn't know about the COVID-19 pandemic. So it just illuminated the need for worker protections and advocacy for the safety and well-being of those on the front lines.
Thank you. Kara?
So, piggybacking off of what Daniel said, uh, there were talks about the board during the pandemic. I myself worked for a large A to Z company and was on leave because of the pandemic. And workers were dying left and right. There were talks of, essential workers. Well, what is an essential worker? Do we go to work? Do we not go to work? What protections do we have? We were scared to go to work, or, when we did go to work, what are we supposed to do? So it was big talks around that.
Nafisa, could you give us a sense of the national context around when this was going?
Yeah. And y'all remember, I mean, none of us are so young that we don't remember, but we were terrified as a nation. We didn't know what to do. We were staying home. We were forming pods. We were meeting up on sidewalks and in driveways. I mean, some people were quarantining their mail. Like, we didn't know what to do. And then on the other hand, workers like Kara were being given this new category, special essential, indispensable, necessary for the well-being of society workers, but they weren't being treated with the respect that should accompany a title like that. Aside from, you know, some singing and some banging of pots and pans. And meanwhile, they were literally our human shields from the virus, and were not being given what they needed to do the job. Workers were creating their own personal protective equipment or PPE out of garbage bags and old scrubs, and sometimes were also, you know, like certainly not being paid overtime and no hazard pay either. So the first demands to emerge were from already organized workers, like some in Massachusetts, where SEIU 1199 home care workers started demanding first and foremost access to PPE. And then secondly, transparency. Tell us who's tested positive. Just tell us who's tested positive. It's so simple. And yeah, so that's where we started, is, oh my gosh, everything's chaos. And now suddenly we have this hero category assigned to our people, but they don't have the resources to continue doing their hero work.
Thank you all for providing that context again and reminding us of just how not that long ago that was. Danielle, could you share with us some context what it is that the Harris County Department of Economic Equity and Opportunity does, and where the Essential Workers Board sits in county government?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll shorten it for everyone because it is kind of a long department name, but we are shortened to DEEO, and we work to eliminate economic disparities by implementing programs and initiatives that foster an inclusive local economy. So programs such as MWBE programs to help support minority and women-owned businesses that might not typically have access to certain opportunities that other larger corporations might have. We have programs that help to support small businesses, helping to make it more accessible for certain businesses to apply for contracts with the county, et cetera. And DEEO, together with the Office of Boards and Commissions, the OBC is a division of the Office of County Administration. Together, we co-manage the Essential Workers Board, which is one of the county-appointed boards and commissions.
And Kara, would love to hear about your perspective as a member of the board since the very beginning, and now you hold the position of chair of the board. Could you tell us about your background as an organizer and a frontline worker, and how it is that you came to be involved with the Essential Workers Board?
So before joining the Harris County Essential Workers Board, I was part of one of the organizations that pushed for the Essential Workers Board. I was with, well, I still am. I'm with National Domestic Workers Alliance, We Dream in Black. They were part of that discussion to push for the board itself. And before my work with the board, I still am a worker. I do domestic work. I've done, you know, warehouse work. I've done restaurant work. I've worked in so many different industries. So I have firsthand experience of what it's like to be out there working with the general public or working in general for, you know, low wages or poor working conditions. Those experiences have pretty much shaped my perspective. I've seen firsthand the instability and lack of protections workers deal with every day. Out of that, I became an organizer. My first organizing experience, I used to work as a shopper for Instacart. I helped organize a national strike when Instacart threatened to take away our tips. That was, you know, back in 2016. And that was, you know, an opportunity for me as a single mom to provide for my family and not have to deal with some of the conditions I had worked with before. Since then, I've gone on to do domestic work, and now I currently work with teachers. And my perspective from working in these different industries have, you know, it's given me a voice, or helps me give voice to the policy conversations that we're having. So that's pretty much kind of what drew me into the Essential Workers Board.
Thank you. Nafisa, in the report, we talk a little bit about how the Essential Workers Board came together during the pandemic as a result of the coordinated efforts between the national, state, and local level organizations that were part of the Always Essential campaign. What did you learn about how coalition building across these different levels can bring together partners across sectors to collaborate on policies like the Essential Workers Board?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yuri. I'm still taking learnings from Always Essential and that campaign. One of the big things that I think about today a lot about Always Essential is that in crisis, nobody knows what to do exactly. Like nobody knows exactly the path of how to get through it, how to win, how to keep your people safe. And so one thing that's been true of Jobs with Justice, but especially in that moment in 2020, was that we figured out the way to know what to do is to, of course, go to the most impacted, and then figure out how to elevate their demands, their needs, and a path will emerge. But what was tricky about the COVID moment was that it wasn't one sector of workers who were impacted and suddenly designated essential. It wasn't just healthcare workers. It was healthcare workers and grocery workers and construction workers. Like there were so many workers across so many different types of representation, types of work, types of training, that we couldn't just go with one demand. And we also were acutely aware that we couldn't just have the immediate demands addressing PPE and hazard pay as like the overarching thing. Because then what? What if we win hazard pay? Then they just take it away. What if we win PPE, but workers are still dying? What if we win PPE, but they still don't tell us who's sick or when someone's been exposed at work and there's no, there's so many things left. And so what was great about building this coalition was that we had to create a coalition that crossed as many essential worker sectors as possible. So we built a coalition of about 27 organizations at the national level that touched as many essential industries as possible. That allowed us to then understand the demands at the local level and how to tie those into different types of campaigns. So I can ask for hazard pay from a corporation. I can also ask the legislature to demand that we pay hazard pay. I can there are lots of different ways to do that same campaign. And being in coalition with those 27 plus national organizations like the National Domestic Workers Alliance that Kara is a part of meant that we could be connected to We Dream in Black in Houston and Fe en Justicia in Houston and SEIU in Houston and Workers Defense Project in Houston to pull together the full picture of what do essential workers need in Harris County. And above all else, it was an ongoing seat at the table, not a snapshot at the seat at the table, not today, not say right now on this one small thing, but an ongoing mechanism to keep talking about what they need as conditions change.
That's great. Thank you. Kara, how has being a member of the board impacted the way that you see the role that essential workers play in the communities that you represent?
I would say serving on the board has shown me just how powerful essential workers are to the foundation of our communities. We're talking about people who keep hospitals, schools, homes, and whole industries running, often without the recognition or resources they deserve. Sitting on the board reinforced for me that worker voices isn't optional, it's necessary. Policies that shape people's lives are better, stronger, and more sustainable when the people doing the work are part of the decision making. A great example of this is how earlier this year, the board was part of the conversation around Harris County's living wage policy. This raised the standards for both county employees and employees of our vendors. That showed the real impact worker voices can have when it's centered in policymaking.
That's amazing. Thank you. A question for all three of you, really. What does the essential worker designation mean today? A couple years out from the pandemic, while we might not be using the term essential workers with the same frequency as we did back then, they're still very much at the front lines, protecting, especially in the case of Harris County, against climate disasters that occur frequently in the region. Would love to hear open question to you all. What does that mean and how are you organizing around that today?
I think that frontline worker is a really good term to exemplify what a lot of people think about as an essential worker. Police officers, healthcare workers, people that are first to make contact in certain situations. And I remember there being a lot of talk of people feeling that not being deemed essential meant that they weren't important, which is not the case. It's never the case that industries that are not deemed essential are not important. I think that maybe it's just more so the first people to hit the ground running when there's a response needed. So that's sort of how I look at it.
Thanks so much.
Mhm.
Nafisa,
Sure.
oh, did you want to jump in?
Well, I could tell you, I mean, we named our campaign Always Essential because we were trying to make the point that these workers have always been essential, have always been the backbone, have always been the thing that allows the rest of the economy to function. And that's still true today. And this category wasn't new to the pandemic, and it's still in use in new and different ways today. For example, we have this looming shutdown, government shutdown next week, potentially. And workers that are designated essential will be forced to work without pay if the government shuts down. So I think the thing that the Always Essential campaign was concerned about, and I think what we're all still concerned about, is giving special designations to workers in order to take advantage of them. We're not cool with special designations that allow you privileges, a seat at the table, all those things are great. And it's useful to make delineations between workers, if it's about uplifting them, but if it's about increasing exploitation or harm, that's why we need a seat at the table.
On that, I would love to ask you, Nafisa, tell us about how JWJs approach the policies that build worker power, how that's shifted over time. What are other examples of this model or other policy models happening elsewhere that you all are excited about?
Yeah, I mean, this was one that really opened, this was very exciting to us. The Harris County Essential Worker Board is still one of the most interesting and exciting models. And like you said, Yuri, part of it is because it's 100% workers. Like everybody on the board is a worker. Like that is really cool. And it's completely cross-sectoral, which I still haven't seen elsewhere. Like it's not just a warehouse worker board, and it's not just a healthcare worker board. It's about all workers with a similar designation, which brings so much more power, complexity, but power. There are other ones. So to back up, Jobs with Justice believes fundamentally that we can't have a functioning democracy without thriving worker governance. There are a lot of reasons for that, and probably people who are coming to your webinar don't need to be reminded. But putting workers in positions of governance helps level the playing field in an unjust economic system, but also builds the long-term muscle in working people of how to do governance. What does it actually mean to make decisions and to do democracy in action? What does it mean to run to be on the board? What does it mean to then have to come together and find common ground with folks in 9 different sectors of work about what's going to raise the floor for all of us? That's hard work. That's the work of governance that we all are able to do and have access to. But workers are often not put in the position to do that work. So that's one of the things that's most exciting to me about the Harris County Essential Worker Board. But that's also what's exciting about collective bargaining, whether it's in a union context or all of these other mechanisms that we're fighting to win. At Jobs with Justice, we call it expanded bargaining, meaning any place where we can build a mechanism for workers to have more say on their lived conditions, their lived economic conditions, great. So another one that Jobs with Justice is currently working on is a warehouse worker protection type bill in Philadelphia. I think it's currently backburnered for various other reasons, but it's a health and safety committee of warehouse workers, because it's incredibly difficult to get someone like Amazon to the table, to get them to change anything about their policies. But it is not as difficult to get a city council that cares about their constituents to help to enact a space for those workers to talk about their conditions and propose solutions. That's something that you can do almost anywhere. There are lots of other examples too, like in Los Angeles, right before we won the Harris County Essential Worker Board, Los Angeles had enacted these, do you remember what they're called, Yuri? The health boards that they did? It's okay. I don't remember either. But Los Angeles did these very cool health boards, which basically weren't just like, oh, okay, workers have a seat at the table to make healthcare like to help make health and safety decisions, but they could also create committees at any site, at any work site, after they got a certain number of workers together. So this was tremendously empowering because it took away what employers would use as like union activity or like as find something, an excuse to retaliate against. It created an entire umbrella of work for an entire umbrella of excuses or like justification for workers to come together and talk about their working conditions and then propose solutions. Again, I don't know, did that get where you wanted? I can say more.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you. Thanks for putting that into the context of what else is happening around the country. Kara, to the point about the complexities potentially of being a part of a board that's multi-sectoral, what has that been like to work with folks across 9 different industries? I'm sure that you all, the day-to-day of your work varies across the board. What have been common pain points and other aspects that you've been able to organize around and find common ground with across the board?
Common ground that we've been able to come up with the board, I would say, again, the living wage policy that was passed this past spring. Another common point we've come across is the need for our community to know that there are other options available. We've partnered up with some of the unions to have them come to our town halls and present the different trades and know that there are opportunities such as earn while you learn, where people can pick up a trade and get paid while they're doing that. Oftentimes some of our communities are limited to retail or fast food or these low-paying jobs. And although we do want better working conditions in those roles, we want people to be able to grow into other industries. One of the pain points that we've come across as a board, though, is figuring out like what is an essential worker. I previously proposed this summer to change the criteria for membership for our board. One of our former members was a high-ranking leadership at his company, and I wanted to change the membership criteria so that people like me or some of the other workers got fair representation on the board. I didn't want bosses on the board, because at that point, then anybody can come in, like that leadership guy that was on the board before, and make it a board full of high leadership and run us off. And I got pushback about that. And I guess the pushback, so the criteria I proposed was they couldn't be a high ranking leadership, and they had to make within like certain HUD guidelines, income levels. And they're, well, what if this person, has this title, but they make under this? And I was like, well, I personally don't want to be on the same board as my boss, not as somebody who can, hire and fire me. So that, I guess, would be one of my pushback points is what is an essential worker and who should be on this board. So I guess, yeah, that would be one of my pushbacks. I recently switched from one teacher union to another teacher union, and that was that's the criteria for the particular teachers union I'm with, is you can't be leadership. They don't want their leaders, you don't want your principal on the board with you, or your super, or not board, on the union with you, or the superintendent, because how are you going to get fair representation when you're talking about pay if the union represents them as well? So that kind of pushed into like why I would wanted that criteria introduced as well.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear about how your experiences are shaping how you think about similar boards and other contexts. That leads into my question for you, Danielle. As you're in conversation with other municipalities or potentially states, what are the best practices that you would share for folks thinking about policies like the Essential Workers Board that bring worker voice into decision-making processes in other parts of the country?
Yeah. Well, first, I think that it's really great that people even want to provide this opportunity for workers to be involved in processes that will ultimately affect them as workers, as policies are developed and programs are established. So I think that's already, a step in the right direction to have that interest in the first place. But I would say definitely to be mindful of the fact that this could potentially be a worker's first time having this sort of opportunity. So they might need just some very foundational training and continued guidance throughout the process, to know practically what are we even able to do? How do we go about doing it? How do we submit our recommendations? So just making sure that you're able to support them through these processes, whether it's a dedicated staff member or it's support from a particular department, just making sure that the board has that guidance and that they know who they can lean on for support will be huge. Also, taking the time to establish and document procedures so that expectations are as clear as possible. So that board members, also so the support staff, also people that might want to be involved with the board, whoever will know what the expectations are, whether that's by establishing bylaws that cover how meetings should run, that cover whether there should be an executive committee or how voting should go, etc. So just have those conversations to determine those things and have them documented so that, again, expectations are as clear as possible. And then once a board such as the Essential Workers Board is able to be stood up, just remembering to include the board in conversations where appropriate and where you feel that they can have valuable insight, so that, you can give them a chance to actually complete the mission that they were established to do. So just remembering to make them involved in appropriate situations.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And I also just want to note now that Danielle and her team have so generously provided these and many more reflections on the experience of working with the Harris County Essential Workers Board, which you can read more about in our report. So my final question before we move into Q&A from the audience, Kara, what's next for the Essential Workers Board, and what are your hopes for the board in the future?
So right now we are currently planning our events for next year. More so in the near future, we are planning to do a volunteer event at the food bank. Next year we have a town hall plan, back to school. It's in talks to do a career readiness series, where workers will be able to work on their resume, get clothing tips, again, be able to meet with some of the unions to learn about trades, and also learn about some of the educational programs available at the local colleges. I believe we are also in talks with a couple of county organizations about the upcoming is it FIFA, the World Cup that's coming to Houston. So we definitely have a couple things going on. I know that the childcare, so Judge Hidalgo here in Harris County had proposed a additional budget funding for childcare that didn't pass. So we're looking at other ways where we can, support workers as far as like childcare or other industries. So lots of work coming up.
That all sounds so exciting. Thank you so much. We encourage folks to continue dropping questions in the chat or the Q&A box. A pre-submitted question that we got was, I think for Kara and Danielle, reflecting on the process of recruiting for the board and continuing to maintain the board, what's your process like getting folks involved and drawing support from the community around the board?
That has been a joint effort between the board members, DEO, and the Office of Boards and Commissions. Together, we will sort of spread the word and say, hey, there's this board that exists, and this is what they do. And if you're interested in being part of it, here's the application. I know that I personally have gone to different community events and set up a table and shared the link with people that come and shared information about the board. And that's really a good way to spread the word about the board, gain more visibility, and find out if people might be interested. So things like that. I know that the Boards and Commissions office will sometimes share the application. They're the department that will filter the applications through us. So they've been very instrumental in getting some of the applications in also. And I know that the board member, I'll let Kara talk more about this, but I know that the board members also will share the applications with their networks, their colleagues, etc.
Yeah, we've been sharing the application with our networks, friends, people that we think will be a great fit for the board. It's been very difficult to fill board seats. Even when we filled board seats, it hasn't necessarily been a perfect match, but we are diligently working to get it filled with people from the community.
Another question that we've just got from the audience, can you talk about some of the authority that the board has and how you have used it?
I can start by saying that the board is able to provide input on certain policies and programs, and also to make recommendations to the commissioner's court. For example, the Harris County is revising a contractor safety policy, and they've made it a point to meet with board members to get their input on what are things that are important to include, how should we revise this, what do we want to make sure we look at. So we're very grateful that they have put such an emphasis on input from the board for that. If the board feels that there are certain programs that are needed to address the needs of certain workers, then they are able to make those recommendations to Commissioner's Court for them to consider those implementations, for example. And I don't know if Kara has anything else that she wants to add.
I can give a direct example with the contractor safety policy. We were just asked a couple weeks ago for more input. There is the current policy as it is. We were asked to give input on the implementation and what that would look like. And if some of the parts were important or necessary, and if we were okay with different alternatives. So there's definitely, our voices are definitely being heard.
Another question that we got, thank you, from the audience. Could you discuss why it is so important for people with relevant lived experience to be a part of the policymaking process? So for example, what do people with relevant lived experience bring that others don't to the table?
From my perspective, I think their experience, their lived experience can inform a lot. Someone who does not know what it's like for teachers to be in a classroom with students who have disciplinary concerns, academic concerns, etc., they might not be able to formulate the most effective policies that would affect those teachers. So teachers that know what it's like to be in that classroom with way too many students and not enough support, they're able to say, hey, this is what we need in this situation to be able to help that. So just that experience can bring a lot of insight into things that can be very effective and actually helpful for those situations that they live from day to day.
Oh, pretty much what she was saying. I I owned my own cleaning business at once, and I found it easier as a manager or the owner to give out policies or, guidelines for my workers if I had already done it, rather than I just throw out a whole bunch of rules and they land where they stick and I had failures. Having that lived experience of, this is how we do this, and going from that point where, we started that way to begin with, rather than I throw out some random policy or rule with no insight to it. It streamlined things for me, and it even saved me money. So from a business standpoint, it saved me money using those inputs from my workers or me doing tasks myself, rather than this sounds good, I'm gonna go with this, and who cares about anything else.
We also all often solve for the wrong problems, right? Like even I remember so clearly in 2020 being like, okay, hazard pay is it. Like that is the thing we need to, like that is the hill we need to die on. And then I remember feeling so almost dumb when I saw the demands coming out of SEIU 1199 in Boston, where they were like, transparency is the first most important thing. We just need to know who's sick. The first thing is that we need to know who's tested positive, how many people in my unit have tested positive, like what's going on. We just need information, and information doesn't cost anything. Information doesn't, like it's a zero cost ask. And had workers not been in decision, like had a voice in decision making, that wouldn't have become a central, it might have become a central demand nationwide, but that's really what brought it to everyone else. It's not, policymakers, even organizers, without the firsthand experience of what's actually on the front, what is actually the critical thing to fix, we just solve for the wrong problems.
That's such a great point. Thank you all. This is exciting to see that in Oregon, folks are working on a workforce standards policy and facing a lot of employer opposition, unfortunately, in the legislature. Any advice on how to deal with employer opposition? And curious if you could provide any context on the process of getting the Essential Workers Board policy passed in Harris County, and maybe dynamics from the state that you might have faced.
Danielle, you look like you're thinking, but I can.
Well, I am thinking, and I'm thinking that, so I feel that this might have potentially come up more before I came to this department. So by the time I got here, I had not been experiencing employer pushback, but I'm curious to know if at the beginning stage, if that was more of a thing or not.
Yes, it was definitely a thing. And it's always going to be a thing. Anytime workers want a seat at the table and a voice, employers are going to push back. But we had such a strong coalition in Houston and such a brilliant advocate in Judge Hidalgo, that it was pretty easy to see, like, to make the argument that this is good for everyone. And the way that Kara just described, how actually knowing what the heck's going on and having a safe place for us to like come up with solutions together actually benefits everyone. One thing that's harder is that, one of the ways that it makes it easier for business to stomach is the enforcement mechanisms and how strong those are. And so I don't know, actually, it's interesting. I actually live here in Portland, Oregon, and don't know about this campaign and want to know more. But I think that's always where the rubber hits the road with employers, is like, how much am I actually going to have to do what you tell me to do? And how much money is that going to cost me? We did ultimately have some employers, some like businesses in Houston who came out in support of the legislation with much coalition pressure and support. But mostly it was ongoing coalition pressure, meaning all of these community and labor organizations in Houston. The example of LA, which was also already out there, and a strong advocate in Judge Hidalgo that helped us figure out how to get through some of the challenges from the business community.
Thank you both, and thank you for the question. Another question that just came in, given the rollbacks of federal level regulations on workers' rights and health and safety, do you see the Essential Workers Board having to take on extra responsibilities or areas to cover? How are you guys thinking about what's happening at the federal level?
I would say what's happening at the federal level. I haven't necessarily seen it affecting us locally just yet. We as the county is doing its own thing where we're pushing for the contractor safety policy. The county is pushing for its own policies. There might be some effects to an extent. I really don't see the federal stuff affecting us at a local level just yet. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, let's see, one more question that came in. What training was most important for the members of the board? And what other advice would you give to other boards, or to others who serve on boards like this one, perhaps in other parts of the country?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kara, you can start.
I would say the Fair Labor Standards Act. That was an important training that we had. Learning that the minimum wage is still stuck at $7.25, and tip workers are only making $2.15 an hour. That was a very important training. And then even learning that everyone is protected under the Fair Labor Standards Act, including our undocumented workers. They still have protections, and oftentimes, employers will use their immigration status against them. I feel like that was an important training for the board. Another one we had was a policy training about how to look at policy and come up with our own.
At the height of the Always Essential campaign, we also had a fellowship program called Always Essential. Kara, did you take part in that?
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like and whether it was helpful? It's okay if it wasn't. I won't be sad.
No. It was very helpful. That's where I that was, I would say that training helps in being able to tell my own story. I actually still use some of the skills from that training to this day for job interviews. But yeah, that was very important. I got to hear other perspectives from other workers from other industries. I myself have been out of the restaurant industry for well over a decade, and hearing that they're still going through the same stuff I went through when I worked as a tipped employee, and how even I want to say we had a conversation around restaurant workers for 9/11, how they had to go right back to work after it happened, like nothing happened. That's big. Some of the workforce today hasn't lived through that experience, but quite a few of us, have or remember 9/11 and the impact it had. And 9/11, like COVID, you have these big events happening, and we're still called to the front lines, like whatever. But yeah, that training had an impact to me to this day. I'm still using storytelling.
That of course makes me exceptionally happy. And for a little bit of context, so in the height of the campaign, we were trying and fighting for more and more mechanisms for workers to have governance. We're still doing that. It's what we believe in most fundamentally. But there is also the concern that there would be either a skills gap or a confidence gap in workers' ability to do the governance work. And that's by design, right? The opposition or people in power don't want it to feel easy and accessible for everyone to govern. Like they want it to be mysterious, so that you don't feel entitled to be part of it, whether that's voting or governing, both. And so we were like, let's build a fellowship program with all workers, all essential workers from across different sectors in different places that are doing similar fights to build a seat at the table, and put them in touch with one another and build some curriculum about governance, about yourself and your strength, your campaign and your story, and the basics of governance and what it's going to take to be on one of these boards. And I think, honestly, it is the thing that I think is the coolest thing to have been accomplished in that period of time. And I'm glad, Kara, that you think fondly of it.
Yeah.
This last question might be a good one to end on, and I'm going to broaden the scope of it slightly and pose it at all three of you. 5 years out, what's your vision for the board? What changes and goals do you foresee? And maybe Nafisa, 5 years out, what is the JWJ vision for policy? I'll just open that question up to you all.
What's our vision for 5 years down the line for the board? That's a really good question.
I would hope.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. I think 5 years down the line, I think that so many more people will know about the board. One of the big things has been to just gain more visibility, spread the word. So I envision that by that point, it will be something that is just known far and wide. And people will want to be a part of it. And, I think that sometimes it's just one of those things that just takes more time being on the ground and having more people come to be aware of what you're doing. And then, so maybe when it's time for board members to cycle through, maybe they might know other people who are waiting to join the board next. So that's part of what I envision further down the line. Just it being more widely known.
I would hope, again, like she was saying, more visibility for the board, more community involvement. I would definitely like to see the board as a resource for workers in the community to be able to reach out to and, share some of the experiences that they're experiencing at work. Heck, I would even be hopeful that maybe they could anonymously report some of the stuff that they're seeing, and it could be their safe haven.
I love it. I love the board being a safe haven for workers, Kara. That's so cool. So from the national perspective, I have endless numbers of fantasies about what it looks like in 5 years. But I do think that there are some fundamental policy shifts that J with J is interested in. One of them is just cause termination. So, there's this myth, like there's this idea for those that are not familiar with this wonky thing, like that an employer needs a reason to fire you. Like that's something that across the board, people seem to think they have that right. It doesn't exist in the US, and it should. Like there should be at least some explanation given. that would create a lot more space for workers to organize, to feel safe, to do all that stuff. And I know our policy department is working on what that might look like to advance the conversation around just cause. You've seen housing advocates do it around just cause eviction. Like, if you're going to evict me, you need to provide me a reason to do so. Very reasonable. Similarly, if you're going to end my employment, you should provide me a reason for doing so. I may disagree with that reason, but you should provide me a reason. But that's a simple policy thing. I think the truth is, for us, is like a much larger scale governance with workers in the driver's seat. Before the election, we had some big fantasies about building like a industry standards board in the southern US around auto manufacturing particularly. So if you can imagine a whole bunch of auto workers from different plants in different states in the South who are building this new economy in what they're calling either the battery belt or various other things, what if they could together set standards, set a floor for what that looks like, for health and safety, for wages, for all this stuff? What would that do? What would that do to transform the Southern economy? What would that do to transform people's lives? That feels much further away now, but is still, it's still a twinkle in our eyes. And we still have a couple of really awesome auto campaigns moving, but the idea of that board is a little bit further off. But on that scale is what I hope we're at least aspiring to as a worker movement.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for this great conversation. And I think with that, we can take lessons that we've learned from you all and putting together this report and continue to spread the word. And hopefully we'll see it take off in other places as well. Thank you to the audience as well for joining us today for this panel conversation. If you found this interesting and want to learn more, we encourage you to check out the report on our website, which we'll drop a link to again in the chat. Big thank you again to our panelists, as well as my colleagues at CLJE who helped to make this conversation happen, including Sharon Block, Taya Burke, Alita Castillo, and Giovanni Thomas, as well as our report's co-authors, Yori Smits and Laura Tatum, who you can read more about on our website as well. Thank you all again so much. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.